Count, I have reflected on the matter, said Franz. I thank you for your courtesy, but I shall content myself with accepting a place in your carriage and at your window at the Rispoli Palace, and I leave you at liberty to dispose of my place at the Piazza del Popolo. But I warn you, you will lose a very curious sight, returned the Count. You will describe it to me, replied Franz, and the recital from your lips will make as great an impression on me as if I had witnessed it. I have more than once intended witnessing an execution, but I have never been able to make up my mind. And you, Albert? I, replied the Viscount, saw Castaing executed, but I think I was rather intoxicated that day, for I had quitted college the same morning, and we passed the previous night at a tavern. Besides, it is no reason because you have not seen an execution at Paris that you should not see one anywhere else. When you travel, it is to see everything. Think what a figure you will make when you are asked, "How did they execute at Rome?" And you reply, "I do not know." And besides, they say that the culprit is an infamous scoundrel, who killed with a log of wood a worthy canon who had brought him up like his own son. Diable! When a churchman is killed, it should be with a different weapon than a log, especially when he has behaved like a father. If you went to Spain, would you not see the bullfights? Well, suppose it is a bullfight you are going to see. Recollect the ancient Romans of the circus, and the sports where they killed 300 lions and 100 men. Think of the 80,000 applauding spectators, the sage matrons who took their daughters, and the charming vestals, who made with the thumb of their white hands the fatal sign that said, "Come, dispatch the dying." Okay, where was I? I am full of Italian food now. Dante has moved from mere vengeance into bloodlust, it feels like, putting peer pressure on Franz to say, if you don't see the executions, you're not seeing really anything in Rome, are you? You're going to go back home and be like, ooh, I was too scared to see the executions when I was in Rome. And everyone in your social circle is going to be like, what were you even talking about, man? I thought you were a grown-up. I thought you had big boy pants. Like, Dante's trying to shame him a little bit here. Is there a reason Dante wants Franz and Albert to witness the execution? I don't know. With each page that we're covering here, I'm aligning much more with Franz, not just because of his position, but like, as I've mentioned, we don't know much of his character. We don't know his background. We don't know what's motivating him. So as he's taking his stance here, here's kind of my read on Franz now. He and Albert are at breakfast with Dante, and everything Dante is saying about his philosophy of executions and murder and vengeance seems to just be bouncing off Albert. Or at least he's not the type that shows his inner reflection on his outside. Maybe it's affecting him, maybe it's not. But he seems pretty careless when it comes to any of this stuff. Whereas Franz seems to be absorbing every single little nuance and detail of what Dante is saying, and isn't afraid to stand his own ground, argue against Dante's points, and stand up and say, you know what? I don't think an execution is for me. How many times have you, as a kid, been in a situation where there's a group of people, maybe a small group, and there's one person who suggests, hey, let's all go do this thing, and you feel deeply uncomfortable with it, but you go along with it anyway? Franz is the type to go, you know what? Nah, I'm good, man. You go enjoy the execution. You just tell me about it afterward, and I'm sure, based on everything you're saying and the level of detail you're providing me about your obsession with execution methods, I'm sure the way you tell it is going to give me just the same impression as having witnessed it myself. So I'm good. I don't know. I'm starting to kind of feel for Franz now. I still don't fully understand his obsession with Dante and uncovering who he really is, but as far as how he kind of exists in this world, I can really see myself, some parts of myself inside of him. We got a few extra minutes, so I did some research here on something that Albert says when Franz kind of rejects the idea of going to witness the execution. He turns and says, you know, how do you feel about all this? And is like, oh, I saw an execution once, but I was quite drunk, so I don't know that I experienced it fully. But he says, quote, I saw Castaing executed. And in true Dumas form, this is a reference to a real situation. Casting was Edme Samuel Casting. He was a French physician in the early 19th century. He was educated, respectable, trusted, and his case kind of shocked the public. He was accused, being a doctor, of poisoning two brothers, the Ballet family. One of the two young men was wealthy, and the idea was that Casting stood to benefit financially from one of the brothers' wills. He believed the case against him was that the poison he used was a morphine or some other opium derivative, and toxicology was still kind of developing at this time, so poisoning was still a difficult method when figuring out how someone died and why. So this became kind of a tabloid case because with toxicology being where it was, medical experts disagreed very sharply about whether or not poisoning had even been used in this case. Some said yes, others said no, and there's a major public debate about this that was happening while Casting was in jail. The trial really became a early test case for what would become forensic medicine and hinging outcomes of trials on that. It's also scandalous because this isn't some common criminal off the street. This is a trusted doctor as a murderer. Something that I think would fit well in our tabloid culture of now, from the 80s until now. So there's something, I think at the time, and even to today, something very deeply unsettling about the idea that a man of his station in life, with his expertise, could exploit that knowledge in order to kill someone when he has an oath to save that person's life. This being a very early subversion of that public trust. I mean, there are many examples of that going back into time, but with city centers and newspapers and like the form of communication and how people can communicate with one another, you can see the fervor growing a bit more than if it were some little hamlet back in the 15th century. This all created a public spectacle over this man, and one of the like first huge media events, if you want to call it that. Newspapers were following it closely, consistently, and I'm sure shaped public debate because they certainly didn't have the morals. Well, I was going to say that we have today, but maybe not going to go that far. The result was that Casting was convicted in 1823 and was then executed by guillotine in Paris. Because of the media attention, the execution drew a huge crowd, was a major public event. And Dumas' employment of it here is more evidence of him grounding his characters, his fictional situations, to real world and historical events. But the fact that Albert is mentioning this kind of off the cuff and that he was drunk during that time says something about his character. You know, it would be like a character who, like, when you ask people of a certain generation, where were you when Kennedy was shot? Everyone has a kind of story of how that moment imprinted on them. How often do you hear someone go, oh, yeah, I kind of remember that, but I was really drunk that day? You know, that would say something about that character, as I think this is saying about Albert's character here. It doesn't seem like Albert is very serious in life. We've seen him at the opera as a kind of vain man. And it made me bring this all home. I didn't anticipate making this episode so long, but how do we think Dante is absorbing this? I mean, the fact that Albert is Fernand and Mercedes' son, sorry, I had my face in my hands. I'm just going to assume that's who Albert is. I feel very stupid. I don't think we've gotten confirmation on that yet, so I'm going to reserve a little bit of my pride. But all of this to say, if he is the Albert of Mercedes and Fernand, then clearly Dante is aiming at something here. Whoa, okay. Nope, you're getting into speculative mode, Landon. Let's pause that. But with all of Dante's talk about execution and vengeance being proportional, is Albert his target for making Fernand suffer? But I question that, because then he would be also making Mercedes suffer. Doesn't matter. Just a question that went through my head. But how is Dante absorbing Albert's kind of position and attitude toward life? Clearly, they are not in, contrast argumentatively with one another, but Albert's carelessness and vainness going through life, and vanity going through life, stands in opposition to Dante, who is carefully studied and seems to be nibbling every morsel of things he encounters. Granted, he's putting the things he's interested in his pathway in order to absorb it all, but it's very different. The two men's philosophy on life and their attitude toward life is kind of diametrically opposed. Is this confirming something for Dante? Would Albert be someone who can make Dante see the error of his ways? I'm very impressed with how, I've been skeptical for so long, because I've felt untethered and unmoored, but now, I'm starting to see how the themes of this book are tying this all together, and that bringing in these new characters and putting us in their perspectives is deepening those things in a way that I didn't expect. I just had to be patient, and doing 1 page a day on this podcast sometimes makes that difficult. Okay. Wow. That was a lot. We just absorbed a lot. Let's all process and meet back here tomorrow, shall we? Okay. A little bit more of chapter 35 when we wake up tomorrow morning, or whenever you listen to this throughout the day. Okay, Landon, shut up and say goodbye. Okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.